Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. A Christmas show, if you will. Krystal.
Indeed,
what do we have?
do. Broke out the Christmas decor here in the studio, which feels nice, even though the news, of course, continues to be quite grim. We have, of course, that temporary ceasefire in place. Big question today is whether it is going to extend beyond the initial 4 days. So we've got details there. We also have pretty stunning, I guess, confirmation of some previous reports coming out of Ukraine that indeed it was us and the Brits who made sure there was no peace deal at the beginning of this war. So we'll break that down for you. Also, we had a slew of lawsuits last week filed in the state of New York. I'll give you the reason for that, but against many famous people, including Sean Combs, including Eric Adams, alleging sexual assault. Break that down for you. And also, like I said, why those claims are emerging right now. Saagar's got a UFO special for you.
Yes.
Dave Grush on Joe Rogan. Break all of that down for you, too. And Fox News with a really embarrassing walk back after they claimed that an explosion at the U.S.-Canada border was terrorism, as confirmed, they alleged, by law enforcement sources. It was nothing of the sort. They had to walk it back, and you will never believe the cope that they are offering at this point.
Oh, it's absolutely fantastic. Before we get to that, though, as Krystal, you guys did a great job, and I think I mentioned it as well. We've got our Christmas merch that is currently on sale. We can put that up there. That's right. That's right. It's limited edition. The socks, I can attest, are some of the best socks I have ever. I'm not just saying that. I swear, I wear them all the time in my normal life. But this is the piece de resistance.
Yes.
The
Those
sweater.
are flying off the shelves, apparently.
They're flying off the shelves. It's all available right now. Shop.breakingpoints.com. Also, if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber. Of course, that's very useful. As a thank you, we are having a Black Friday special, I guess, if you will. We're currently giving it for $90 a year. That's a steal, so you can go ahead and take advantage of that. Both of those available on our website right now. And then I guess in the hardest turn of all time, what's going on with the ceasefire?
Yes, indeed. All right, let's go ahead and put this up on the screen from the Financial Times. This is some of the latest reporting about the details of who has been exchanged thus far and what some of the holdups are in terms of extending this temporary pause. Now, just as a reminder here, the basic idea was a 4-day ceasefire. Hamas was agreeing to release 50 Israeli hostages. Israel, in return, was going to release 150 Palestinian prisoners that they had been holding. So far, as of the writing of this article, 39 women and children plus 18 foreigners had been released by Hamas. Israel had freed 117 Palestinian women and children. So the headline here from the Financial Times is Hamas must locate dozens more hostages in order to extend that truce, according to Qatar, which has been central, of course, in these negotiations. That 4-day pause is set to expire after today. So that's why this is such a crucial piece right at this moment. Now, indications from both Hamas and Israel are that they would like to extend the truce. The idea being that for every 10 additional hostages that Hamas releases, that truce would be extended for another day. But Qatari Prime Minister Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman Al Thani told the Financial Times that more than 40 other women and children were being kept captive in Gaza who were not believed to be held by Hamas. He said the truce could be extended if Hamas were able to use the pause to locate those hostages. He also said that Israel had provided Qatar with a list of more than 90 women and children seized during that horrific October 7th attack. About 240 hostages total were taken and dragged back to Hamas-controlled Gaza. The other captives include Israeli soldiers and elderly civilians. So that is basically where we are right now. I do have some comments for you from the President of the United States, who says he is also hoping that the pause gets extended further. Let's take a listen.
Beginning this morning, under a deal reached by extensive U.S. diplomacy, including numerous calls I've made from the Oval Office to leaders across the region, fighting in Gaza will halt for 4 days. This deal also is structured to allow a pause to continue for more than 50 hostages to be released. That's our goal. This morning, I've been engaged with my team as we began the first difficult days of implementing this deal. It's only a start, but so far it's gone well.
And I wanted to take this opportunity, too, to keep the focus on the human beings here who have been through an absolutely horrific ordeal. We can show you some of the Israeli hostages here that were released. Here they are, being led by Hamas militants. I want to make everyone aware this was a video released by Hamas.
Yes.
So this is Hamas propaganda. That's why everybody's waving and smiling and, hey, have a great time, because this is the face that Hamas wants to put on this exchange. But you can see women, you can see children. They put a priority on the elderly. They put a priority on also these Thai nationals who are sort of like migrant workers within Israel who also were released as part of this exchange. So that's the Israelis who were released. Go ahead to the next one. We have some footage of some of the Palestinian prisoners who were released. I went into a little bit of this system sort of equivalent to what we did at Guantanamo Bay of indefinite detention. The overwhelming number of these Palestinian prisoners who are being released were arrested but have never been found guilty, and they're held in this sort of legal limbo. So that's a lot of the individuals who are being released on the Israeli side, Palestinians who are being released.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, and you guys did a great job covering it while I was out. And I think that it's obviously a good step in the right direction anytime that there is not only a ceasefire, but there's actually hostage release going on. The big question, as you laid out, Krystal, is this going to continue? So currently, Hamas, as you laid out, appears to be wanting an extension. Israel saying that maybe it can continue with 10 to 15 more prisoners per day. Obviously, the Thai prisoners and all of that was almost a bit separate, as I understand it, from the way that the Israelis were negotiating this. The Qataris saying that there is potential in the long run. For the back end and for people who want to see this continue in terms of hostage release, and I think that's what really all of us should want, not on the Israeli side, but have the prisoners returned, is that there currently is some optimism about extending this, because the previous ceasefire that was negotiated in 2014, there were 4 separate instances where that happened. They broke down 3 times, but as I've laid out here before, once you have some sort of diplomatic breakthrough like this, it is generally difficult to not at least see the beginning of the end. However, the Israelis are pushing back on that.
Yeah, so there's, I guess, a question, because we reported at the time how Tony Blinken, when he went to Israel to argue for a pause similar to this, and also keep in mind, actually, the contours of this deal were negotiated a month ago, and then it was dramatically delayed by Israel's ground invasion, and really Netanyahu's government has been very reluctant to move forward with any sort of a deal. The furthest right-wing factions of his government voted actually against this deal because they just want to keep bombing, they just want to keep the fighting going, and have showed, I think it's fair to say, no concern about the safety of the hostages, and of course are, interested in indiscriminately bombing Gaza. So he has pressure from his right in terms of just keeping up the fight. Now, domestically, and I think this is what led him to finally cut this deal, you have huge domestic political pressure to try to bring these hostages home safe and sound. And of course, Hamas should release all of the hostages. That's what they should do morally, ethically, et cetera. But also, we have to acknowledge that the longer that the indiscriminate bombing campaign goes on, the more these hostages' lives are at risk, because, of course, they are being held in Gaza. So they are subject to the risks of these bombing attacks, just as every Palestinian that is there. So that's some of the competing pressures on Netanyahu. So when Tony Blinken originally went to Israel to make this case of, hey, we should cut some kind of a deal to have some sort of a temporary pause, humanitarian pause, temporary ceasefire, whatever you want to call it, his argument wasn't, oh, it's for the good of the people or the hostages or whatever. It was, we want to buy you time diplomatically, internationally, so that you can continue your campaign and your offensive longer. So put this up on the screen. This is from Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, who said to troops that this will be a, quote, short respite, after which the fighting will continue with intensity and pressure will be made to bring back more hostages. At least 2 more months of fighting is expected. So on the one hand, there's an argument, as Saagar was saying, of, if you have a pause, you can start to see the end of a conflict. The fact that there are negotiations helps to build some sort of a trust if both sides are fulfilling their side of the agreement, which we'll put that aside for a moment. So there's hope, that just by nature of having those negotiations, potentially you can be closer to the end of the conflict. But that's different from what the Israelis are saying. They're saying this is just a pause, and then we're going to get back to an intense level of fighting. And we know, of course, that they are broadcasting that they're moving now from bombing the north, which is basically completely destroyed and uninhabitable, to bombing the south. Khan Yunis is where they say, oh, now the Hamas leadership is there, Hamas HQ is there. This is one of the areas that people have been told to flee to find safety. So that's kind of where we are. And Saagar, the other piece here, just as a note, is during the ceasefire, it's not like all things have been quiet. Put this up on the screen. Israel launched airstrikes on the outskirts of Damascus during this ceasefire. Now, technically, Syria, Lebanon, Hezbollah, they were not part of this ceasefire technically. But in addition, you had Israeli forces killing at least 7 Palestinians in the West Bank in the past 24 hours. You also had Israeli troops fatally shooting 2 Palestinians and wounding 11 others in Gaza itself as they were trying to return north after the IDF had told them to stay put in the south. You also have a peacekeeping force in Lebanon that was fired on by Israeli fire as well. And the last thing that I'll note as part of this, so the Israelis have released 117 Palestinians over the course of the ceasefire. At the same time, they've detained 116 new Palestinian prisoners across the occupied West Bank.
Right. So it's interesting, too, to also see those airstrikes, because the airstrike, or at least a missile strike, we're not exactly 100% sure what it is, was in the Damascus International Airport, which only that day resumed flights after a month-long hiatus. They are saying, I mean, nobody's acknowledging whether this is Israel or not. It almost certainly is. They're the only ones really who have been conducting this type of activity. The reason being that it is a main artery for a lot of supplies and others to these Iranian-backed militias. They may have also done it with the behest of the U.S. because many of these militias are attacking U.S. troops. So we never know what some of the behind-the-scenes stuff that's going on here. With the hostage situation in general, it seems to me the Netanyahu government itself is completely torn because you had those two ministers who voted against it. Now, in a traditional system, and I saw a lot of people saying this at the time, they should resign. Like, if you're going to disagree on such a fundamental issue inside of the Israeli cabinet, then you should resign and you should say, I don't agree with the coalition government. But one of the reasons why they can't resign, or Netanyahu can't let them go, is because he needs their right-wing support to maintain his status as the prime minister of all of Israel. So I think what this actually highlighted most to me is how tenuous the support for Netanyahu is within his own government, and really how that's actually hamstringing international peace, I guess, if you will. His own domestic political considerations are driving so much of the policy in this current government, and that is just so detrimental if you actually want to see the release of all hostages, if you want to see the resumption of some sort of peace, if you even want to see some sort of different diplomatic approach or long-term thinking. It is literally not possible for Netanyahu to conduct himself in a long-term manner because he always says we'll talk about who's to blame on October 7th once the bombing and the fighting is all done. And given some of the information that's been released so far, these guys screwed this up more than we did on 9/11, which I did not think possible. In the background, in terms of the memos that were written to them, the forward deployed units, the fact that, I mean, even most indefensible is that many of the troops that were supposed to be there were in the West Bank. I mean, so the security failure is so multifaceted that basically everyone involved should resign and possibly even be prosecuted for negligence. And that's just from what's publicly available today before any such investigation. And I think to me, it just highlights, I'm like, dude, he has got to go. Like, there's no way that he can maintain the head of the Israeli government right now with any really sort of credibility for a person who wants anything long term. And I actually do think, though, that people inside Israel, given his very, very low approval rating and the almost certain fact that if there were an election he would not win today, they should be most furious, I think, really about this. And especially if you want the return of hostages. Because, I mean, if you think about it too, Krystal, if all the hostages are back, then there's going to be a lot of questions inside Israeli society. Like, now what? What are we doing here exactly? Because the hostage, bring our people back, is of course the rallying cry. But if that's over, what are they going to do now? What's their forward position?
Well, and even if you just have like the women and the children and the elderly and the civilians returned, then it's a much different and less emotionally fraught issue. And I think your point is really important. And it's really important to understand the domestic political pressures. Bibi is very ideological, but his number one concern is maintaining his grip on power. Yes. And I think that's very clear. And we may say, like, listen, this guy's done, he's finished, the Israeli public is disgusted with him. If elections were held today, not only him, but Likud would be, his entire party would be tossed to the curb. That is true. But this is also a person who's been a survivor for a lot of decades in Israeli politics. And so he had a very difficult time cobbling together this coalition government in the first place. and was only able to do it basically by like the skin of his teeth. And it's a little bit analogous to, to put it in like American domestic political context, and obviously this is not a perfect analogy, but when you have the Republicans with a very thin margin in the House where they barely got that majority by the skin of their teeth, who has that handed power to? The Matt Gaetz of the world. So Bibi is very beholden. And these, far right, like extremist factions, and I don't think anyone, even they would not dispute the characterization of their views that way. He is really beholden to them because he has to have them on his team and as part of his government to maintain his grip on power. So that is part of why he is so constrained. And then you also have, within the Israeli public, and this is borne out by the polling, they aren't concerned about Palestinian life. They're concerned with revenge. And so that's the plan that he has put in place. And all this talk of, we're going to eliminate Hamas or even degrade Hamas, et cetera, according to their own analysis, somewhere they say they've gotten between 1,000 and 2,000 Palestinian, Hamas fighters, militants. Well, if you put that in context of the numbers of civilians that have been killed, that means you have like a 90% civilian death rate, and have only taken out, a relatively minimal portion of Hamas militants, even after all of these weeks of a massive bombing campaign. So that's basically where things stand on the Israeli front.
Exactly. The Israeli domestic political situation is very fraught, I think, with this hostage situation. There are intense pressures right now inside of Israel. They're like, listen, we've got hostages coming back. Like, you need to keep this going as long as possible. So if they walk that back, it is going to, I think, open up a fissure. And I was thinking, you're saying in terms of analogies, I think Chamberlain might be a good one as well. If we think to the early days of the Second World War, the reason why Chamberlain ultimately was booted out of power was not Munich, even though that's what a lot of people think. It was a catastrophic failure on the Norway debate, and then eventually led to people inside the government saying we can no longer support you, and then even the coalition government saying we're not going to continue to serve under him. So if we think about it that way, he's playing with fire right now, because if he screws this up, this actually could be what takes him out from power, even though he wants to keep it going as long as possible. Lots of pressures on him from the right and from the left. I think the predominant view in Israeli society, from what I can tell, as look, let's be honest, they don't particularly care about civilian casualties. They care the most about what's going on with their people. So if he does continue on with the military campaign, or let's say, God forbid, something does happen to some of these hostages and, or some of them are killed or something like that, and you see a total breakdown, I think he would face a lot of domestic political pressure. But this is all just from the side. We don't know. As of right now, it stands. So, I think that's probably a good thing. And we'll see, because international pressure right now is so high. The Qataris, the US, Egyptians, the Jordanians, everybody pressing. Like, let's just at least let this continue. And then when that happens, you see some resumption of talks in the interim. It's possible.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.